Chapter 9 of Quit Your Worrying by George Wharton James. Health Worries. There is an army, whose numbers are legion, who worry about their health and that of the members of their family. What with the doctors scaring the life out of them with the germ theory, seeking to obtain legislation to vaccinate them, examine their children nude in school, take out their tonsils, appendices, and other internal organs, inject serums into them for this, that, and the other, and requiring them to observe a score and one maxims which they do not understand, there is no wonder they are worried. Then, when one considers the army of physicians who feel it to be their duty to write of sickness for the benefit of the people, who give detailed symptoms of every disease known, and of the larger army of quacks, who deliberately live and fatten themselves upon the worries they can create in the minds of the ignorant, the vicious, and the diseased, of the patent medicine manufacturers who spend millions of dollars annually in scaring people into the use of their nostrums, none of which are worth the cost of the paper with which they are wrapped up. Is there any wonder that people who are not trained to think should be worried? Worries meet them on every hand, at every corner. Do they feel an ache or a pain? According to such a doctor or such a patent medicine advertisement, that is a dangerous symptom which must be checked at once, or the most fearful results will ensue. Then there are the naturopaths, physicultopaths, gymnastopaths, hygienists, raw food advocates, and 1,001 other notionists who give advice as to what, when, and how you shall eat. Horace Fletcher insists that food be chewed until it is liquid. Another authority says bosh to this, and asks you to look at the dog who bolts his meal and is still healthy, vigorous, and strong. The raw food advocate assures you that the only good food is uncooked, and that you take out this, that, and the other by cooking, all of which are essential to the welfare of the body. Between these natural authorities and the medical authorities, there is a great deal of warfare going on all the time, and the layman knows not wherein true safety lies. Is it any wonder that he is worried? Many members of the medical profession and the drugstores have themselves to thank for this state of perpetual worriment and mental unrest. They inculcated, nurtured, and fostered a colossal ignorance in regard to the needs of the body, and a tremendous dread and blind fear of everything that seems the slightest degree removed from the everyday normal. They have persistently taught those who rely upon them that the only safe and wise procedure is to rush immediately to a physician upon the first sign of anything even slightly out of the ordinary. Then, with wise looks, mysterious words, strange symbols, and loathsome decoctions, they have sent their victims home to imagine that some marvellous wonder-work will follow the swallowing of their abominable mixtures, instead of frankly and honestly telling their consultants that their fever was caused by overeating, by too late hours, by dancing in an ill-ventilated room, by too great application to business, by too many cocktails, or too much tobacco smoking. The results are many and disastrous. People become confirmed worriers about their health. On the slightest suspicion of an ache or a pain, they rush to the doctor or the drugstore for a prescription, a dose, a powder, a potion, or a pill. The telephone is kept in constant operation about trivialities, and every month a bill of greater or lesser extent has to be paid. While I do not wish to deprecate the calling in of a physician in any serious case by those who deem it advisable, I do condemn as absurd, unnecessary, and foolish in the highest degree this perpetual worry about trivial symptoms of health. Every truthful physician will frankly tell you, if you ask him, that worrying is often the worst part of the trouble. In other words, that if you never did a thing in these cases that distress you, but would quit your worrying, the discomfort would generally disappear of its own accord. One result of this kind of worry is that it genders a nervousness that unnecessarily calls up to the mind pictures of a large variety of possible dangers. Who has not met with this nervous species of worrier? The train enters a tunnel. What an awful place for a wreck! or it is climbing a mountain grade with a deep precipice on one side. My, if we were to swing off this grade! I have heard scores of people who, on riding up the great cable incline of the Mount Low Railway, have exclaimed, "What would become of us if this cable were to break?" And they were apparently people of reason and intelligence. The fact is, the cable is so strong and heavy that with two cars crowded to the utmost, their united weight is insufficient to stretch the cable tight, let alone putting any strain upon it sufficient to break it. And most nervous worries are as baseless as this. Yet, says some apologist for worries, accidents do happen. Look at the Eastland in Chicago and the loss of the Titanic. Railways have wrecks, collisions, and accidents. Horses do run away. Dogs do bite. People do become sick. Granted, without debate or discussion. But if everybody on board the wrecked vessels had worried for 6 months beforehand, would their worries have prevented the wrecks? Mind you, I say worry, not proper precaution. The shipping authorities, all railway officials and employees and so on, should be as alert as possible to guard against all accidents. But this can be done without one moment's worry on the part of a solitary human being. And care is as different from worry as gold is from dross, coal from ashes. By all means take due precautions. Study to avoid the possibility of accidents. But do not give worry a place in your mind for a moment. A twin brother to this health worrier is the nervous type who is sure that every dog loose on the streets is going to bite. Every horse driven behind is surely going to run away. Every chauffeur is either reckless, drunk, or sure to run into a telegraph pole, have a collision with another car, overturn his car at the corner, or run down the crossing pedestrian. Every loitering person is a tramp who is a burglar in disguise. Every stranger is an enemy, or at least must be regarded with suspicion. Such worriers always seem to prefer to look on the dark side of the unknown rather than on the bright side. Think no evil is good philosophy to apply to everything, as well as genuine religion, when put into practice. The world is in the control of the powers of good, and these seek our good, not our disaster. Have faith in the goodness of the powers that be, and work and live to help make your faith true. The man who sees evil where none exists will do more to call it into existence than he imagines. And equally true, or even more so, is the converse, that he who sees good where none seems to exist will call it forth, bring it to the surface. The teacher who imagines that all children are mean and are merely waiting for a chance to exercise that meanness will soon justify his suspicions, and the children will become what he imagines them to be. Yet such a teacher often little realizes that it has been his own wicked fears and worries that helped, to put it mildly, the evil assert itself. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Worries of Parents. A worrying parent is at once an exasperating and a pathetic figure. She, for it is generally the mother, is so undeniably influenced by her love that one can sympathize with her anxiety. Yet the confidant of her child, or the unconcerned observer, is exasperated as he clearly sees the evil she is creating by her foolish, unnecessary worries. The worries of parents are protean, as are all other worries, and those herein named must be taken merely as suggestions as to scores of others that might be catalogued and described in detail. Many mothers worry foolishly because their children do not obey, are not always thoughtful and considerate, and act with wisdom, forgetful that life is the school for learning. If any worrying is to be done, let the parent worry over her own folly in not learning how to teach or train her child. Line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, is the natural procedure with children. It is unreasonable to expect old heads upon young shoulders. Worry, therefore, that children have not learned before they are taught is as senseless as it is demoralizing. Get down to something practical. I know a mother of a large family of boys and girls. They are as diverse in character and disposition as one might ever find. She is one of the wise, sensible, practical mothers who acts instead of worrying. For instance, she believes thoroughly in allowing the children to choose their own clothing. It develops judgment, taste, practicability. One of the girls was vain and always wanted to purchase shoes too small for her, in order that she might have pretty feet. Each time she brought home small shoes, her mother sent her back with admonitions to secure a larger pair. After this had continued for several times, she decided upon another plan. When the too small shoes were brought home, she compelled the girl to wear them, though they pinched and hurt, until they were worn out. And, as she said in telling me the story, that ended that. One of her sons was required to get up every morning and light the fire. Very often he was lazy and late, so that the fire was not lighted when mother was ready to prepare breakfast. One night he brought home a companion to spend a day or two. The lads frolicked together so that they overslept. When mother got up in the morning there was no fire. She immediately walked to the foot of the stairs and yelled, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" at the top of her voice. In a few moments both lads, tousled, half-dressed, and well scared, rushed downstairs, exclaiming, "Where's the fire? Where's the fire?" "I want it in the stove," was the mother's answer. And that was the end of that. The oldest girl became insistent that she be allowed to sit up nights after the others had gone to bed. She would study for a while and then put her head on her arms and go to sleep. One night her mother waited until she was asleep, went off to bed and left her. At 3 o'clock in the morning she came downstairs, lighted lamp in hand, and alarm clock set to go off. As soon as the alarm bell began to ring, the girl awoke, startled to see her mother standing there with the lighted lamp, herself cold and stiff with the discomfort of her position. And that was the end of that, said the mother. Here was common sense, practical, hard-headed training instead of worry. Bend your sense, your intellect, your time, your energy to seek how to train your children, instead of doing the senseless, foolish, inane, and utterly useless thing of worrying about them. Imagine being the child of an anxious parent who sees sickness in every unusual move or mood of her boy or girl. A little clearing of the throat. "I'm sure he's going to have croup or diphtheria." The girl unconsciously puts her hand to her brow. "What's the matter with your head, dearie? Got a headache?" A lad feels a trifle uncomfortable in his clean shirt and wiggles about. "I'm sure Tom's coming down with fever. He's so restless and he looks so flushed." God forbid that I should ever appear to caricature the wise care of a devoted mother. That is not what I aim to do. I seek, with intenseness of purpose, to show the folly, the absurdity of the anxieties, the worries, the unnecessary and unreasonable cares of many mothers. For the moment fear takes possession of them, some kind of nagging is sure to begin for the child. "Oh, Tom, you mustn't do this," or "Maggie, my darling, you must be careful of that." And the child is not only nagged, but is thus placed under bondage to the mother's unnecessary alarm. No young life can suffer this bondage without injury. It destroys freedom and spontaneity, takes away that dash and vigour, that vim and daring that essentially belong to youth, and should be the unhampered heritage of every child. I'd far rather have a boy and girl of mine get sick once in a while, though that is by no means necessary, than have them subjected to the constant fear that they might be sick. And when boys and girls wake up to the full consciousness that their parents' worries are foolish, unnecessary, and self-created, the mental and moral influence upon them is far more pernicious than many even of our wisest observers have perceived. There never was a boy or girl who was worried over, who was not annoyed, fretted, injured, and cursed by it, instead of being benefited. The benefit received from the love of the parent was in spite of the worry, and not because of it. Worry is a hindrance, a deterrent, a restraint. It is always putting a curbing hand upon the natural exuberance and enthusiasm of youth. It says, "Don't, don't," with such fierce persistence that it kills initiative, destroys endeavour, murders naturalness, and drives its victims to deception, fraud, and secrecy to gain what they feel to be natural, reasonable, and desirable ends. I verily believe that the parent who forever is saying "don't" to her children is as dangerous as a submarine and as cruel as an asphyxiating bomb. Life is for expression, not repression. Repression is always a proof that a proper avenue for expression has not yet been found. Quit your don't-ing and teach your child to do right. Children absolutely are taught to dread, then dislike, and finally to hate their parents when they are refused the opportunity of doing, of expressing themselves. Rather, seek to find ways in which they may be active. Give them opportunities for pleasure, for employment, for occupation. And remember this, there is as much distance and difference between tolerating, allowing, permitting your child to do things, and encouraging, fostering in them the desire to do them, as there is distance between the poles. Don't be a dampener to your children, a discourager, a don't-er. A sign, the moment you appear, that they must quit something, that they must repress their enthusiasm, their fun, their exuberant frolicsomeness. But let them feel your sympathy with them, your comradeship, your good cheer, that father, mother, is a jolly good fellow, and, my life for it, you will doubtless save yourself and them much worry in after years. Hans Christian Andersen's story of the ugly duckling is one of the best illustrations of the uselessness and needlessness of much of the worry of parents with which I am familiar. How the poor mother duck worried because one of her brood was so large and ugly. At first she was willing to accept it, but when everybody else jeered at it, pushed it aside, bit at it, pecked it on the head, and generally abused it, and the turkey-cock bore down upon it like a ship in full sail and gobbled at it, and its brothers and sisters hunted it, grew more and more angry with it, and wished the cat would get it and swallow it up, she herself wished it far and far away. And as the worries grew around the poor duckling, it ran away. It didn't know enough to have faith in itself and its own future. The result was, the worries of others affected it to the extent of urging it to flee. For the time being this enlarged its worries, until, at length, falling in with a band of swans, it felt a strange thrill of fellowship with them, in spite of their grand and beautiful appearance, and, soaring into the air after them, it alighted into the water, and, seeing its own reflection, was filled with amazement and wonder to find itself no longer an ugly duckling, but a swan. Many a mother, father, family generally, have worried over their ugly duckling until they have driven him, her, out into the world, only to find out later that their duckling was a swan. And while it was good for the swan to find out its own nature, the points I wish to make are that there was no need for all the worry. It was the sign of ignorance, of a want of perception, and further, the swan would have developed in its home nest just as surely as it did out in the world, and would have been saved all the pain and distress its cruel family visited upon it. There is still another story which may as well be introduced here, as it applies to the unnecessary worry of parents about their young. In this case it was a hen that sat on a nest of eggs. When the chickens were hatched, they all pleased the mother hen but one, and he rushed to the nearest pond, and, in spite of her fret, fuss, fume, and worry, insisted upon plunging in. In vain the hen screamed out that he would drown. Her unnatural child was resolved to venture, and, to the amazement of all, he floated perfectly, for he was a duck instead of a chicken, and his egg was placed under the old hen by mistake. Mother, father, don't worry about your child. It may be he is a swan. He may be a duck, instead of the creature you anticipated. Control your fretfulness and your worry, for it cannot possibly change things. Wait and watch developments, and a few days may reveal enough to you to show you how totally unnecessary all your worries would have been. Teach yourself to know that worry is evil thought, directed either upon our own bodies or minds, or those of others. Note, I say evil thought. It is not good thought. Good thought so directed would be helpful, useful, beneficial. This is injurious, harmful, baneful. Evil thought, worry, directs to the person, or to that part of the body considered, an injurious and baneful influence that produces pain, inharmony, unhappiness. It is as if one were to divert a stream of corroding acid upon a sensitive wound, and do it because we wished to heal the wound. Worry never once healed a wound, or cured an ill. It always aggravates, irritates, and furthermore helps superinduce the evil the worrier is afraid of. The fact that you worry about these things to which I have referred, that you yield your thoughts to them, and in your worry give undue contemplation to them, induces the conditions you wish to avoid or avert. Hence, if you wish your child to be well and strong, brave and courageous, it is the height of cruelty for you to worry over his health, his play, or his exercise. Better by far leave him alone than bring upon him the evils you dread. Who has not observed again and again the evil that has come from worrying mothers who were constantly cautioning or forbidding their children to do that which every natural and normal child longs to do? Quit your worrying. Leave your child alone. Better by far let him break a rib or bruise his nose than all the time to live in the bondage of your fears. Elsewhere I have referred to the fact that we often bring upon our loved ones the perils we fear. There is a close connection between our mental states and the objects with which we are surrounded. Or mayhap it would be more correct to say that it is our mental condition that shapes the actions of those around us in relation to the things by which they are surrounded. Let me illustrate with an incident which happened in my own observation. A small boy and girl had a nervous, ever worrying mother. She was assured that her boy was bound to come to physical ill, for he was so courageous, so adventuresome, so daring. To her he was the duck, instead of the chicken she thought she was hatching out. One day he climbed to the roof of the barn. His sister followed him. The two were slowly and in perfect security inching along on the comb of the roof when the mother happened to catch sight of them. With a scream of half terror and half anger, she shouted to them to come down at once. Up to that moment I had watched both children with comfort, pleasure, and assurance of their perfect safety. Their manifest delight in their elevated position, the pride of the girl in her pet brother's courage, and his scarcely concealed surprise and pleasure that she should dare to follow him, were interesting in the extreme. But the moment that foolish mother's scream rent the air, everything changed instantly. Both children became nervous. The boy started down the roof where he could drop upon a lower roof to safety. His little sister, however, started down too soon. Her mother's fears unnerved her, and she slid, and falling some 25 feet or so, broke her arm. Then, and here was the cruel fatuity of the whole proceeding, the mother began to wail and exclaim to the effect that it was just what she expected. May I be pardoned for calling her a worrying fool. She could not see that it was her very expectation and giving voice to it, in her hourly worryings, and in that command that they come down, that caused the accident. She herself alone was to blame. Her unnecessary worry was the cause of her daughter's broken arm. Christ's constant incitement to his disciples was, "Be not afraid." He was fully aware of the fact that Job declared, "The thing which I greatly feared is come upon me." Hence, worrying mother, curb your worry, kill it, drive it out, for your child's sake. You claim it is for your child's good that you worry. You are wrong. It is because you are too thoughtless, faithless, and trustless that you worry, and, if you will pardon me, too selfish. If instead of giving vent to that fear, worry, dread, you exercised your reason and faith a little more, and then self-denial, and refused to give vocal expression to your worry, you could then claim unselfishness in the interest of your child. But to put your fears and worries, your dreads and anxieties around a young child, destroying his exuberance and joy, surrounding him with the mental and spiritual fogs that beset your own life, is neither wise, kind, nor unselfish. Another serious worry that besets many parents is that pertaining to the courtship or engagement of their children. Here again let me caution my readers not to construe my admonitions into indifference to this important epoch in their child's life. I would have them lovingly, wisely, sagely advise. But there is a vast difference between this and the uneasy, fretful, nagging worries that beset so many parents and which often lead to serious friction. Remember that it is your child, not you, who has to be suited with a life partner. The girl who may call forth his warmest affection may be the last person in the world you would have chosen, yet you are not the one to be concerned. In the January 1916 Ladies' Home Journal there is an excellent editorial bearing upon this subject as follows, quote, "A mother got to worrying about the girl to whom her son had become engaged. She was a nice girl, but the mother felt that perhaps she was not of a type to stimulate the son sufficiently in his career. The mother wisely said nothing, however, until two important facts dawned upon her. First, that possibly her boy was of the order which did not need stimulation. As she reflected upon his nature, his temperament, she arrived at the conclusion that what he required in a life partner might be someone who would prove a poultice rather than a mustard plaster or a fly blister. This was her first discovery. The second was not precisely like unto it, but was even more important, that the son, and not the mother, was marrying the girl. The question as to whether or not the girl would suit the mother as a permanent companion was a minor consideration about which she need not vex her soul. The point he had settled for himself was that here, by God's grace, was the one made for him, and since that had been determined, the wise course was for the mother not to waste time and energy bemusing (worrying) herself over the situation, especially as the girl offered no fundamental objections. Thus the mother, of herself, learned a lesson that many another mother might profitably learn." How wonderfully in his Saul does Robert Browning set forth the opposite course to that of the worrier. Here the active principle of love and trust are called upon, so that it uplifts and blesses its object. David is represented as filled with a great love for Saul, which would bring happiness to him. He strives in every way to make Saul happy, yet the king remains sad, depressed, and unhappy. At last David's heart and his reason grasp the one great fact of God's transcending love, and the poem ends with a burst of rapture. His discovery is that if his heart is so full of love to Saul that in his yearning for his good he would give him everything, what must God's love for him be? Of his own love he cries, quote, "Could I help thee, my Father, inventing a bliss, I would add to that life of the past both the future and this. I would give thee new life altogether, as good ages hence, at this moment, had love but the warrant love's heart to dispense." Then, when God's magnificent love bursts upon him, he sings in joy, quote, "What, my soul? See thus far and no farther? When doors great and small, 99, flew ope at our touch, should the 100th appal?" How utterly absurd, on the face of it, is such a supposition! God, having given so much, will surely continue to give. His love, so far proven so great, it will never cease. O doubting heart of man, of woman, of father, of mother, grieving over the mental and spiritual lapses of a loved one, Grasp this glorious fact: God's love far transcends thine own. What thou wouldst do for thy loved one is a minute fraction of what He can do, will do, is doing. Rest in His love. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee, and in His hands all whom thou lovest are safe. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Marital Worries. I now approach a difficult part of my subject, yet I do it without trepidation, fear, or worry as to results. There are to my mind a few fundamental principles to be considered and observed, and each married couple must learn to fight the battle out for themselves. Undoubtedly, to most married people, the ideal relationship is where each is so perfectly in accord with the other, they think alike, agree, are as one mentally, that there are no irritations, no differences of opinion, no serious questions to discuss. Others have a different ideal. They do not object to differences, serious even and wide. They are so thorough believers in the sanctity of the individuality of each person that every individual must live his own life and thus learn his own lessons, that what they ask is a love large enough, big enough, sympathetic enough to embrace all differences, and in confidence that the working out process will be as sure for one as the other, to rest, content, and serene in each other's love, in spite of the things that otherwise would divide them. This mental attitude, however, requires a large faith in God, a wonderful belief in the good that is in each person, and a forbearing wisdom that few possess. Nevertheless, it is well worth striving for, and its possession is more desirable than many riches. And how different the outlook upon life from that of the marital worrier. When a couple begin to live together, they have within themselves the possibilities of heaven or of hell. The balance between the two, however, is very slight. There is only a foot or less in difference between the west and the east on the transcontinental divide. I have stood with one foot in a rivulet the waters of which reached the Pacific, and the other in one which reached the Atlantic. The marital divide is even finer than that. It is all in the habit of mind. If one determines that he, she will guide, boss, direct, control the other, one of two or three things is sure to occur. One, the one mind will control the other, and an individual will live someone else's life instead of its own. This is the popular American notion of the life of the English wife. She has been trained during the centuries to recognize her husband as lord and master, and she unquestionably and unhesitatingly obeys his every dictate. Without at all regarding this popular conception as an accurate one nationally, it will serve the purpose of illustration. 2. The second alternative is one of sullen submission. If one hates to row, to be nagged, he, she submits, but with a bad grace, consumed constantly with an inward rebellion, which destroys love, leads to cowardly subterfuges, deceptions, and separations. 3. The third outcome is open rebellion, and the results of this are too well known to need elucidation. For whatever they may be, they are disastrous to the peace, happiness, and content of the family relationship. Yet, to show how hard it is to classify actual cases in any formal way, let me here introduce what I wrote long ago about a couple whom I have visited many times. It is a husband and wife who are both geniuses, far above the ordinary in several lines. They have money, made by their own work, the wife's as well as the husband's, for she is an architect and builder of fine homes. While they have great affection one for another, there is a constant undertone of worry in their lives. Each is too critical of the other. They worry about trifles. Each is losing daily the sweetness of sympathetic and joyous comradeship because they do not see eye to eye in all things. Where a mutual criticism of one's work is agreed upon and is mutually acceptable and unirritating, there is no objection to it. Rather should it be a source of congratulation, that each is so desirous of improving that criticism is welcomed. But in many cases, it is a positive and injurious irritant. One meets with criticism, neither kind nor gentle, out in the world. In the home, both man and woman need tenderness, sympathy, comradeship, and if there be weakness or failures that are openly or frankly confessed, there should be the added grace and virtue of compassion, without any air of pitying condescension or superiority. By all means, help each other to mend, to improve, to reach after higher, nobler things. But don't do it by the way of personal criticism, advice, remonstrance, fault-finding, worrying. If you do, you'll do far more harm than good in 99 cases out of every 100. Every human being instinctively in such position, consciously or unconsciously, places himself in the attitude of saying, "I am what I am. Now recognize that and leave me alone. My life is mine to learn its lessons in my own way, just the same as yours is to learn your lessons in your way." This worrying about and off each other has proven destructive of much domestic happiness, and has wrecked many a marital bark that started out with sails set, fair wind, and excellent prospects. Don't worry about each other. Help each other by the loving sympathy that soothes and comforts. Example is worth 1,000,000 times more than precept and criticism, no matter how lovingly and wisely applied. And few men and women are wise enough to criticize and advise perpetually without giving the recipient the feeling that he is being nagged. Granted that, from the critic's standpoint, every word said may be true, wise, and just, this does not by any means make it wise to say it. The mental and spiritual condition of the recipient must be considered as of far more importance than the condition of the giver of the wise exhortations. The latter is all right. He doesn't need such admonitions. The other does. The important question, therefore, should be, is he ready to receive them? If not, if the time is unpropitious, the mental condition inauspicious, better do, say, nothing than make matters worse. But unfortunately, it generally happens that at such times the critic is far more concerned at unbosoming himself of his just and wise admonitions than he is as to whether the time is ripe, the conditions the best possible, for the word to be spoken. The sacred writer has something very wise and illuminating to say upon this subject. Solomon says, quote, "A word spoken in due season, how good is it?" End quote. Note, however, that it must be spoken in due season to be good. The same word spoken out of season may be, and often is, exceedingly bad. Again he says, quote, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver." End quote. But it must be fitly spoken to be worthy to rank with apples of gold. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Worry of the Squirrel Cage. Reference has already been made to The Squirrel Cage by Dorothy Canfield. Better than any book I have read for a long time, it reveals the causes of much of the worry that curses our modern so-called civilized life. These causes are complex and various. They include vanity, undue attention to what our neighbours think of us, a false appreciation of the values of things, and they may all be summed up into what I propose to call, with due acknowledgement to Mrs. Canfield, the worry of the squirrel cage. I will let the author express her own meaning of this latter term. If the story leading up seems to be long, please seek to read it in the light of this expression. Footnote: reprinted from The Squirrel Cage by Dorothy Canfield, $1.35 net, published by Henry Holt & Company, New York City. End of footnote. Quote, "When Mr. and Mrs. Emery, directly after their wedding in a small central New York village, had gone west to Ohio, they had spent their tiny capital in building a small story-and-a-half cottage, ornamented with the jigsaw work and fancy turning popular in 1872. and this had been the nucleus of their present rambling, picturesque, many-roomed home. Every step in the long series of changes which had led from its first state to its last had a profound and gratifying significance for the Emerys, and its final condition, prosperous, modern, sophisticated, with the right kind of woodwork in every room that showed with the latest, most unobtrusively artistic effects in decoration, represented their culminating, well-earned position in the inner circle of the best society of Edinburgh. Moreover, they felt that just as the house had been attained with effort, self-denial, and careful calculations, yet still without incurring debt, so their social position had been secured by unremitting diligence and care, but with no loss of self-respect, or even of dignity. They were honestly proud of both their house and of their list of acquaintances, and saw no reason to regard them as less worthy achievements of an industrious life than their 4 creditable grown-up children, or Judge Emery's honourable reputation at the bar. The 2 older children, George and Marietta, could remember those early struggling days with as fresh an emotion as that of their parents. Indeed, Marietta, now a competent, sharp-eyed matron of 32, could not see the most innocuous coloured lithograph without an uncontrollable wave of bitterness. So present to her mind was the period when they painfully groped their way out of the chromos. The particular Mrs. Hollister who, at the time the Emerys began to pierce the upper crust, was the leader of Edinburgh society, had discarded chromos as much as 5 years before. Mrs. Emery and Marietta, newly admitted to the honour of her acquaintance, wondered to themselves at the cold monotony of her black and white engravings. The artlessness of this wonder struck shame to their hearts when they chanced to learn that the lady had repaid it with a worldly-wise amusement at their own highly coloured waterfalls and snow-capped mountain peaks. Marietta could recall as piercingly as if it were yesterday in how crestfallen a chagrin she and her mother had gazed at their parlour after this incident, their disillusioned eyes open for the first time to the futility of its claim to sophistication. As for the incident that had led to the permanent retiring from their table of the monumental salt-and-pepper castor, which had been one of their most prized wedding presents, the Emerys refused to allow themselves to remember it, so intolerably did it spell humiliation." End quote. In these quotations, the reader has the key to the situation: worry to become as good as one's neighbours, if not better. This is the worry of the squirrel cage. Lydia is Mrs. Emery's baby girl, her pet, her passionate delight. She has been away to a fine school. She knows nothing of the ancient struggles to attain position and a high place in society. Those struggles were practically over before she appeared on the scene. On the occasion of her final homecoming, her mother makes great preparations to please her, yet the worry and the anxiety are revealed in her conversation with her older daughter. Quote, "Oh, Marietta, how do you suppose the house will seem to Lydia after she has seen so much? I hope she won't be disappointed. I've done so much to it this last year. Perhaps she won't like it. And oh, I was so tired because we weren't able to get the new sideboard put up in the dining room yesterday." "Really, mother, you must draw the line about Lydia. She's only human. I guess if the house is good enough for you and father, it is good enough for her." "That's just it, Marietta. That's just what came over me. Is what's good enough for us good enough for Lydia? Won't anything, even the best, in Edinburgh be a come-down for her?" End quote. The attainments of Mrs. Emery both as to wealth and social position, however, were not reached by her daughter Marietta and her husband. But in the determination to make it appear as if they were, Marietta thus exposes her own life of worry in a talk with her father. Quote, "Keeping up a 2-maid and a man establishment on a 1-maid income, and mostly not being able to hire the 1-maid. There aren't any girls to be had lately. It means that I have to be the other maid and the man all of the time, and all 3 part of the time." She was starting down the step, but paused as though she could not resist the relief that came from expression. "And the cost of living. The necessities are bad enough, but the other things, the things you have to have not to be out of everything. I lie awake nights. I think of it in church. I can't think of anything else but the way the expenses mount up, everybody getting so reckless and extravagant, and I won't go in debt. I'll come to it though, everybody else does. We're the only people that haven't Oriental rugs now. Why, the Gilberts, and everybody knows how much they still owe Dr. Melton for Ellen's appendicitis, and their grocer told Ralph they owe him several $100. Well, they have just got an Oriental rug that they paid $160 for. Mrs. Gilbert said they just had to have it, and you can always have what you have to have. It makes me sick. Our parlour looks so common, and the last dinner party we gave cost. End quote. Another phase of the squirrel cage worry is expressed in this terse paragraph. Quote, Father keeps talking about getting one of those player pianos, but Mother says they are so new you can't tell what they are going to be. She says they may get to be too common. End quote. By and by it comes Lydia's turn to decide what place she and her new husband are to take in Enbury society. And here is what one frank, sensible man says about it. Quote, It may be all right for Marietta Mortimer to kill herself body and soul by inches to keep what bores her to death to have a social position in Enbury's 2-for-a-cent society. But for the Lord's sake, why do they make such a howling and yelling just at the tree when Lydia's got the tragically important question to decide as to whether that's what she wants? It's like expecting her to do a problem in calculus in the midst of an earthquake. End quote. And the following chapter is a graphic presentation as to how Lydia made her choice in perfect freedom, oh, the frightful sarcasm of the phrase, during the excitement of the wedding preparations and under the pressure of expensive gifts and the ideas of over-enthusiastic society friends. Lydia now began her own squirrel cage existence. Even her husband urges her into extravagance in spite of her protest by saying, Nothing's too good for you, and besides, it's an asset. The mortgage won't be so very large, and if we're in it, we'll just have to live up to it. It'll be a stimulus. One of the sane characters of the book is dear, lovable, gruff Mr. Melton, who is Lydia's godfather, and her final awakening is largely due to him. One day he finds Lydia's mother upstairs sick abed, and thus breaks forth to his godchild, quote, About your mother. I know without going upstairs that she is floored with one or another manifestation of the great disease of social ambitionitis. But calm yourself. It's not so bad as it seems when you've got the right doctor. I've practiced for 30 years among Enbury ladies. They can't spring anything new on me. I've taken your mother through doily fever, induced by the change from tablecloths to bare tops, through portiere inflammation, through afternoon tea distemper, through Art Nouveau prostration, and mission furniture palsy, not to speak of a horrible attack of acute insanity over the necessity of having her maids wear caps. I think you can trust me, whatever dodge the old malady is working on her. End quote. And later, in speaking of Lydia's sister, he affirms, quote, Your sister Marietta is not a very happy woman. She has too many of your father's brains for the life she's been shunted into. She might be damming up a big river with a finely constructed concrete dam, and what she is giving all her strength to is trying to hold back a muddy little trickle with her bare hands. The achievement of her life is to give on a 2,000 a year income the appearance of having 5,000, like your father. She does it. She's a remarkably forceful woman, but it frets her. She ought to be in better business, and she knows it, though she won't admit it. End quote. Oh, the pity of it, the woe of it, the horror of it. For it is one of the curses of our present-day society, and is one of the causes of many a man's and woman's physical and mental ruin. In the words of our author elsewhere, quote, They are killing themselves to get what they really don't want and don't need, and are starving for things they could easily have by just putting out their hands. End quote. Where life's struggle is reduced to this kind of thing, there is little compensation. Hence we are not surprised to read that, quote, Judge Emery was in the state in which of late the end of the day's work found him, overwhelmingly fatigued. He had not an ounce of superfluous energy to answer his wife's tocsin, while she was almost crying with nervous exhaustion. That Lydia's course ran smooth through 1,000 complications was not accomplished without an incalculable expenditure of nervous force on her mother's part. Dr. Melton had several times of late predicted that he would have his old patient back under his care again. Judge Emery, remembering this prophecy, was now moved by his wife's pale agitation to a heart-sickening mixture of apprehension for her and of recollection of his own extreme discomfort whenever she was sick." End quote. Yet, in spite of this intense tension, she was unable to stop, felt she must go on, until finally a breakdown intervened and she was compelled to lay by. On another page, a friend tells of his great-aunt's experience. Quote, "She told me that all through her childhood her family was saving and pulling together to build a fine big house. They worked along for years until, when she was a young lady, they finally accomplished it, built a big 3-story house that was the admiration of the countryside. Then they moved in, and it took the women folks every minute of their time, and more, to keep it clean and in order. It cost as much to keep it up, heated, furnished, repaired, painted and everything the way a fine house should be, as their entire living used to cost. The fine big grounds they had laid out to go with the mansion took so much time to..." End quote. Finally, Lydia herself becomes awakened, startled, as she sees what everybody is trying to make her life become, and she bursts out to her sister, quote, "I am just frightened of everything. What everybody expects me to do, and to go on doing all my life, and never have any time but to just hurry faster and faster, so there'll be more things to hurry about, and never talk about anything but things." She began to tremble and look white, and stopped with a desperate effort to control herself, though she burst out at the sight of Mrs. Mortimer's face of despairing bewilderment. "Oh, don't tell me you don't see at all what I mean. I can't say it, but you must understand. Can't we somehow all stop now and start over again? You get muslin curtains and not mend your lace ones. And mother, stop fussing about whom to invite to that party. That's going to cost more than he can afford, father says. It makes me sick to be costing him so much. And not fuss about having clothes just so. And Paul have our house built little and plain, so it won't be so much work to take care of it and keep it clean. I would so much rather look after it myself than to have him kill himself making money so I can hire maids that you can't. You say yourself you can't. And never having any time to see him. Perhaps if we did, other people might, and we'd all have more time to like things that make us nicer to like." End quote. And when her sister tried to comfort her, she continued, quote, "You do see what I mean. You see how dreadful it is to look forward to just that, being so desperately troubled over things that don't really matter, and perhaps having children, and bringing them to the same thing, when there must be so many things that do matter." End quote. Then, to show how perfectly her sister understood, the author makes that wise and perceptive woman exclaim, quote, "Mercy, Dr. Melton's right. She's perfectly wild with nerves. We must get her married as soon as ever we can." End quote. Lydia gives a reception. Here is part of the description. Quote, "Standing as they were, tightly pressed in between a number of different groups, their ears were assaulted by a disjointed mass of stentorian conversation that gave a singular illusion as if it all came from one inconceivably voluble source, the individuality of the voices being lost in the screaming enunciation which, as Mrs. Sandworth had pointed out, was a prerequisite of self-expression under the circumstances. They heard, 'For over a month,' and the sleeves were to 'See you again at Mrs. Elliott's. I'm pouring there from 4. I've got to dismiss one with plum-coloured bows all along, $5 a week, and the washing out, and still impossible. I was there myself all the time, and they neither of 35 cents a pound for the most ordinary ferns, and red carnations was all they had, and we thought it rather skimpy under the brought up in one big braid, and cut down with at Peterson's they were pink and white with. Oh no, Madeline, that was at the Burlinghams.'" Mrs. Sandworth took a running jump into the din and sank from her brother's sight, vociferating, The Petersons had them of old gold, don't you remember, with little—" The doctor, worming his way desperately through the masses of femininity, and resisting all attempts to engage him in the local fray, emerged at length into the darkened hall, where the air was, as he told himself in a frenzied light of imagination, less like a combination of a menagerie and a perfume shop. Here, in a quiet corner, sat Lydia's father alone. He held in one hand a large platter piled high with wafer-like sandwiches, which he was consuming at a gargantuan rate, and as he ate he smiled to himself. "Well, Mr. Ogre," said the doctor, sitting down beside him with a gasp of relief, "let a wave-worn mariner into your den, will you?" Provided with an auditor, Judge Emery's smile broke into an open laugh. He waved the platter toward the uproar in the next rooms. "A boiler factory ain't in it with women, lovely women, is it?" he put it to his friend. "Gracious powers, there's nothing to laugh at in that exhibition," the doctor reproved him with an acrimonious savagery. "I don't know which makes me sicker, to stay in there and listen to them, or come out here and find you thinking they're funny." "They are funny," insisted the judge tranquilly. "I stood by the door and listened to the scraps of talk I could catch, till I thought I should have a fit. I never heard anything funnier on the stage." "Looky here, Nat." The doctor stared up at him angrily. "They're not monkeys in a zoo, to be looked at only on holidays and then laughed at. They're the other half of a whole that we're half of, and don't you forget it. Why in the world should you think it funny for them to do this tomfool trick all winter and have nervous prostration all summer to pay for it? You'd lock up a man as a dangerous lunatic if he spent his life so. What they're like and what they do with their time and strength concerns us enough sight more than what the tariff is, let me tell you." "I admit that what your wife is like concerns you a whole lot." The judge laughed good-naturedly in the face of the little old bachelor. "Don't commence jumping on the American woman so. I won't stand it. She's the noblest of her sex." "Do you know why I am bald?" said Dr. Melton, running his hand over his shining dome. "If I did, I wouldn't admit it." The judge put up a cautious guard. "Because I foresee that whatever I say will be used as evidence against me. I've torn out all my hair in desperation at hearing such men as you claim to admire and respect and wish to advance the American woman. You don't give enough thought to her, real thought, from one year's end to another, to know whether you think she has an immortal soul or not." End quote. Later, Lydia's husband insists that they give a dinner. Quote, "It was to be a large dinner, large that is for Edinburgh, of 20 covers, and Lydia had never prepared a table for so many guests. The number of objects necessary for the conventional setting of a dinner table appalled her. She was so tired, and her attention was so fixed on the complicated processes going on uncertainly in the kitchen, that her brain reeled over the vast quantity of knives and forks and plates and glasses needed to convey food to 20 mouths on a festal occasion. They persistently eluded her attempts to marshal them into order. She discovered that she had put forks for the soup, that, in some inexplicable way, at the plate destined for an important guest, there was a large kitchen spoon of iron. A wild sort of whimsical humour rose in her from the ferment of utter fatigue and anxiety. When Paul came in looking very grave, she told him with a wavering laugh, "If I tried as hard for 10 minutes to go to heaven as I've tried all day to have this dinner right, I'd certainly have a front seat in the angel choir. If anybody here tonight is not satisfied, it'll be because he's harder to please than St. Peter himself." End quote. During the evening, quote, "Lydia seemed to herself to be in an endless bad dream. The exhausting efforts of the day had reduced her to a sort of coma of fatigue, through which she felt but dully the successive stabs of the ill-served, unsuccessful dinner. At times the table, the guests, the room itself, wavered before her, and she clutched at her chair to keep her balance. She did not know that she was laughing and talking gaily and eating nothing. She was only conscious of an intense longing for the end of things, and darkness, and quiet." End quote. When it was all over and her husband was compelled to recognize that it had been a failure, his mental attitude is thus expressed. Quote, he had determined to preserve at all costs the appearance of the indulgent, non-critical, over-patient husband that he intensely felt himself to be. No force, he thought grimly, shutting his jaws hard, should drag from him a word of his real sentiments. Fanned by the wind of this virtuous resolution, his sentiments grew hotter and hotter as he walked about, locking doors and windows, and reviewing bitterly the events of the evening. If he was to restrain himself from saying, he would at least allow himself the privilege of feeling all that was possible to a man deeply injured. End quote. And that night Lydia felt for the first time the quickening to life of her child, and during all that day until then she had forgotten that she was to know motherhood. Can words more forcefully depict the worry of the squirrel cage than this, that an unnecessary dinner, given in unnecessary style, at unnecessary expense, to visitors to whom it was unnecessary, should have driven from her thought, and doubtless seriously injured, the new life that she was so soon to give to the world? O men and women of divine descent and divine heritage, quit your squirrel cage stage of existence. Is life to be one mere whirling around of the cage, of useless toil or pleasure, of mere imagining that you are doing something? Work with an object. Know your object, that it is worthy the highest endeavour of a human being, and then pursue it with a divine enthusiasm that no obstacle can daunt, an ardour that no weariness can quench. Then it is you will begin to live. There is no life in worry. Worry is a waste of life. If you are a worrier, that is a proof you, in so far as you worry, do not appreciate the value of your own life. For a worthy object, a divine enthusiasm, a noble ardour, are in themselves the best possible preventatives against worry. They dignify life above worry. Worry is undignified, petty, paltry. Where you know you have something to do worth doing, you are conscious of the divine benediction. And who can worry when the smile of God rests upon him? This is a truism almost to triteness, and yet how few fully realize it. It is the unworthy potterers with life, the dabblers in life stuff, those who blind themselves to their high estate, those who are unsure of their footing, who worry. The true aristocrat is never worried about his position. The orator convinced of the truth of his message worries not as to how it will be received. The machinist, sure of his plans, hesitates not in the construction of his machinery. The architect, assured of his accuracy, pushes on his builders without hesitancy or question, fear or alarm. The engineer, knowing his engine and his destination, has no heart quiver as he handles the lever. It is the doubter, the unsure, the aimless, the dabbler, the frivolous, the dilettante, the uncertain that worry. How nobly Browning set this forth in his epilogue, quote, "What had I on earth to do with the slothful, with the mawkish, the unmanly? Like the aimless, helpless, hopeless did I drivel, being who?" One who never turned his back, but marched breast forward, never doubted clouds would break, never dreamed, though right were worsted, wrong would triumph. Held we fall to rise, are baffled to fight better, sleep to wake. No, at noonday, in the bustle of man's work time, greet the unseen with a cheer. Bid him forward, breast and back as either should be. Strive and thrive, cry speed, fight on, fair ever, there as here. End quote. And this is not mere poetry, or rather it is because it is mere poetry that it is real life. Browning had nearly 70 years of it. He knew. Where there are those to whom God has whispered in the ear, there is no uncertainty, no worry. The musician who knows his instrument, knows his music, knows his key, and knows his time to play, never hesitates, never falters, never worries. With tone clear, pure, strong, and certain, he sends forth his melodies or harmonies into the air. Cannot you, in your daily life, be a true and sure musician? Cannot you be certain, absolutely, definitely certain, of your right to play the tune of life in the way you have it marked out before you, and then go ahead and play? Play in God's name as God's and man's music maker. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. Religious Worries and Worriers. Misunderstandings, misconceptions, and ignorance in regard to what really is religion have caused countless millions to mourn and worry. Indeed, far more to worry than to mourn. Religion should be a joyous thing, the bringing of the son and daughter into close relationship with the Father. Instead, for centuries, it has been a battle for creeds, for mental assent to certain doctrines, rather than a growth in brotherhood and loving relationship, and those who could not see eye to eye with one another deemed it to be their duty to fight and worry each other, even to their death. This is not the place for any theological discussion, nor is it my intent to present the claims of any church or creed. Each reader must do that for himself, and the less he worries over it, the better I think it will be for him. I have read and reread Cardinal Newman's wonderful Pro Apologia, his statement as to why and how he entered the bosom of the Roman Catholic Church, and it has thrilled me with its pathos and evidence of deep spiritual endeavour. Charles Warren Stoddart's Troubled Heart and How It Found Rest is another similar story, though written by an entirely different type of man. Each of these books revealed the inner thought and life of men who were worried about religion, and by worry I mean anxious to the point of abnormality, disturbed, distressed unnecessarily. Yet I would not be misunderstood. Far be it from me, in this age of gross materialism and worship of physical power and wealth, to decry in the least a proper degree of solicitude for one's personal salvation. The religious life of the individual, the real, deep, personal, hidden, unseen, inner life of a human soul, is a wonderfully delicate thing, to be touched by another only with the profoundest love and deepest wisdom. Hence I have little to say about one's own inner struggles, except to affirm and reaffirm that wisdom, sanity, and religion itself are all against worrying about it. Study religion, consider it, accept it, follow it, earnestly, seriously, and constantly, but do it in a rational manner, seeking the essentials, accepting them, and then resting in them, to the full and utter exclusion of all worry. But there is another class of religious worriers, namely those who worry themselves about your salvation. Again, I would not be misunderstood, nor thought to decry a certain degree of solicitude about the spiritual welfare of those we love. But here again the caution and warning against worry more than ever holds good. Most of these worriers have found comfort, joy, and peace in a certain line of thought, which has commended itself to them as truth, the one, full, complete, indivisible truth. And it seems most natural for human nature to be eager that others should possess it. This is the secret of the zeal of the street salvationist, whose flaming ardour is bent on reaching those who seldom if ever go to church. The burden of his cry is that you must flee from the wrath to come, hell, by accepting the vicarious atonement made by the blood of Jesus. In season and out of season, he urges that you come under the blood. His face is tense, his brow wrinkled, his eyes strained, his voice raucous, his whole demeanour full of worry over the salvation of others. Another friend is a Seventh-day Adventist, who is full of zeal for the declaration of the third angel's message, for he believes that only by heeding it, keeping sacred the hours from sunset on Friday to Saturday sunset, in accordance with his reading of the fourth commandment, and also believing in the speedy second coming of Christ, can one's soul's salvation be attained. The Baptist is assured that his mode of baptism, complete immersion, is the only one that satisfies the demands of heaven, and the more rigorous members of the sect refuse communion with those who have not obeyed, as they see the command. The members of the Christian Church, as the disciples of Alexander Campbell term themselves, while they assent that they are tied to no creed except the New Testament, demand immersion as a prerequisite to membership in their body. The Methodist, Congregationalist, Presbyterian, Nazarene, and many others are evangelical in their belief, as is a large portion of the Church of England and its American offshoot, both of which are known as the Episcopal Church. Another portion, however, of this church is known as ritualistic, and the two branches in England recently became so involved in a heated discussion as to the propriety of certain of their bishops partaking in official deliberations with ministers of the other, but outside evangelistic churches, that for a time it seemed as if the whole Episcopal Church would be disrupted by the fierceness and anger gendered in the differences of opinion. To my own mind, all this worry was much ado about nothing. Each man's brain and conscience must guide him in matters of this kind, and the worry, fret, stew evolved out of the matter seemed to me a proof that real religion had little to do with it. Recently one good brother came to me with tears in his voice, if not in his eyes, worried seriously as to my own religious belief, because I had asserted in a public address that I believed the earnest prayer of a good Indian woman reached the ear of God as surely as did my own prayers, or those of any man, woman, minister, or priest living. To him the only effective prayers were evangelical prayers, whatever that may mean, and he was deeply distressed and fearfully worried because I could not see eye to eye with him in this matter. And a dear good woman, who heard a subsequent discussion of the subject, was so worried over my attitude that she felt impelled to assure me when I left that she would pray for me. I have friends who are zealous Roman Catholics, and a number of them are praying that I may soon enter the folds of Mother Church. And yet my Unitarian and Universalist friends wonder why I retain my membership in any Orthodox church. On the other hand, my New Thought friends declare that I belong to them by the spirit of the messages I have given to the world. Then, too, my Theosophist friends, and I have many, present to me, with a force I do not attempt to controvert, the doctrine of the universal brotherhood of mankind, and urge upon me acceptance of the comforting and helpful doctrine to them of reincarnation. Not long prior to this writing, a good earnest man buttonholed me and held me tight for over an hour, while he outlined his own slight divergences from the teachings of the Methodist Church, to which he belongs, and his interpretation of the symbolism of Scripture, none of which had the slightest interest to me. In our conversation he expressed himself as quite willing, please note the condescension, to allow me the privilege of supposing the Catholic was honest and sincere in his faith and belief, but he could not for one moment allow the same to the Christian Scientist, who from his standpoint denied the atonement and the divinity of Christ. I suppose if he ever picks up this booklet and reads what I am now going to write, he will regard me as a reprobate and lost beyond the possibility of salvation. Nevertheless, I wish to put on record that I regard his attitude as one of intolerance, bigotry, fanaticism, and impudence, sheer, unadulterated impertinence. Who made him the judge of the thoughts and acts of other men's inner lives? Who gave to him the wisdom and power of discernment to know that he was right and these others wrong? Poor, arrogant fool! His worries were not the result of genuine affection and deep human sympathy, the irrepressible and uncontrollable desires and longings of his heart to bring others into the full light of God's love, but of his overweening self-confidence in his own wisdom and judgment. and I say this in no personal condemnation of him, for I have now even forgotten who it was, but in condemnation of the spirit in which he and all his ilk ever act. Hence, my dear reader, if you are of his class, I say to you earnestly, don't worry about other people's salvation. It may be they are nearer saved than you are. No man can be worried into accepting anything, even though you may deem it the only truth. I have known men whom others regarded as agnostics, who had given more study to the question of personal religion than any 10 of their critics. I can recall 3, all of whom were men of wonderful mentality and great earnestness of purpose. John Burroughs' first essays were written for his own soul's welfare, the results of his long-continued mental struggles for light upon the subject. Major J. W. Powell, the organizer and director for many years of the United States Geological Survey and Bureau of American Ethnology, was brought up by a father and mother whose intense longing was that their son should be a Methodist preacher. The growing youth wished to please his parents, but was also compelled to satisfy his own conscience. The more he studied the creeds and doctrines of Methodism, the less he felt he could accept them, and, much to the regret of his parents, he refused to enter the ministry. Yet, in relating the story to me, he asserted that his whole life had been one long agony of earnest study to find the highest truth. Taking me into his library, where there were several extended shelves, filled from end to end with the ponderous tomes of the 2 great government bureaus that he controlled, he said, "Most people regard this as my life work, and outwardly it is. Yet I say to you in all sincerity that the real, inner, secret force working through all this has been that I might satisfy my own soul on the subject of religion." Then, picking up 2 small volumes, he said, "In these 2 books I have recorded the results of my years of agonizing struggle. I don't suppose 10 men have ever read them through, or perhaps ever will, but these are the real story of the chief work of my inner life." I am one of the few men who have read both these books with scrupulous care, and yet were it not for what my friend told me of their profound significance to him, I should scarcely have been interested enough in their contents to read them through. At the same time, I know that the men who, from the standpoint of their professionally religious complacency, would have condemned Major Powell, never spent 1,000th part the time, nor felt 1/10,000th the real solicitude that he did about seeking the way, the truth, and the life. Another friend in Chicago was Dr. M. H. Lackerstein, openly denounced as an agnostic, and even as an infidel, by some zealous sectaries. Yet Dr. Lackerstein had personally translated the whole of the Greek Testament and several other sacred books of the Hebrews and Hindus, in his intense desire to satisfy the demands of his own soul for the truth. He was the soul of honour, the very personification of sincerity, and as much above some of his critics, whom I well knew, in these virtues as they were above the scum of the slums. The longer I live and study men, the more I am compelled to believe that religion is a personal matter between oneself and God, and is more of the spirit than most people have yet conceived. It is well known to those who have read my books and heard my lectures on the old Franciscan missions of California that I revere the memory of Padres Junipero Serra, Palu, Crespi, Catala, Peri, and others of the founders of these missions. I have equal veneration for the goodness of many Catholic priests, nuns, and laymen of today. Yet I am not a Catholic, though zealous sectaries of Protestantism, even of the church to which I am supposed to belong, sometimes fiercely assail me for my open commendation of these men of that faith. They are worried lest I lean too closely towards Catholicism and ultimately become one of that fold. Others who hear my good words in favour of what appeals to me as noble and uplifting in the lives of those of other faiths of which they do not approve, worry over and condemn my breadth of belief. Indeed, I have many friends who give themselves an immense lot of altogether unnecessary worry about this matter. They have labelled themselves according to some denominational tag, and accept some form of belief that, to them, seems incontrovertible and satisfactory. Many of them are praying for me, and each that I may see the truth from his standpoint. For their prayers I am grateful. I cannot afford to lose the spirit of love behind and in every one of them. But for the worry about me in their minds, I have neither respect, regard, toleration, nor sympathy. I don't want it, can do without it, and I resent its being there. To each and all of them I say firmly, quit your worrying about my religion or want of it. I am in the hands of the same loving God that you are. I have the promise of God's guiding spirit as much as you have. I have listened respectfully and with an earnest and sincere desire to see and know the truth to all you have said, and now I want to be left alone. I have come to exclaim with Browning in Rabbi Ben Ezra, quote, "Now who shall arbitrate? 10 men love what I hate, shun what I follow, slight what I receive. 10 who in ears and eyes match me, we all surmise, they this thing and I that. Whom shall my soul believe?" End quote. For myself, I have concluded that no one shall choose my religion for me, and all the worrying in the world shall not change my attitude. And it is to the worrying of my friends that they owe this state of mind. For this reason, I found myself one day counting up the number of people of different beliefs who had solemnly promised to pray for me. There were Methodists, Campbellites, Baptists, Roman Catholics, Episcopalians, Seventh-day Adventists, Presbyterians, Nazarenes, Holy Rollers, and others. Then the query arose, whose prayers will be answered on my behalf? Each is sure that his are the ones that can be effective, yet their prayers differ. They are to some degree antagonistic, and insofar as they petition that I become one of their particular fold, they nullify each other, as it is utterly impossible that I accept the specific form of faith of each. The consequent result in my own mind is that, as I cannot possibly become what all these good people desire I should be, as their desires and prayers for me controvert each other, I must respectfully decline to be bound by any of them. I must and will do my own choosing. Hence all the worry on my behalf is energy, strength, and effort wasted. Let me repeat then to the worrier about the salvation of others, you are in a poor business. Quit your worrying. Hands off. This is none of your concern. Believe as little or as much and what you will for your own soul's salvation, but do not put forth your conceptions as the only conceptions possible of divine truth before another soul who may have an immeasurably larger vision than you have. Oh, the pitiableness of man's colossal conceit, the arrogance of his ignorance. As if the God of the universe were so small that one paltry finite man could contain in his pint measure of a mind all the ocean of his power, knowledge, and love. Let your small and wretched worries go. Have a little larger faith in the love of the Infinite One. Tenderly love and trust those whose welfare you seek, and trust God at the same time. But don't worry when you see the dear ones walking in a path you have not chosen for them. Remember your own ignorance, your own frailties, your own errors, your own mistakes, and then frankly and honestly, fearlessly and directly, ask yourself the question, if you dare to take upon your own ignorant self the responsibility of seeking to control and guide another living soul as to his eternal life. Brother, sister, the job is too big for you. It takes God to do that, and you are not yet even a perfect human being. Hence, while I long for all spiritual good for my sons and daughters and for my friends, and I pray for them, It is in a large way without any interjection of my own decisions and conclusions as to what will be good for them. I have no fears as I leave them thus in God's hand, and regard every worry as sinful on my part and injurious to them. I have no desire that they should accept my particular brand of faith or belief. While I believe absolutely in that which I accept for the guidance of my own life, I would not fetter their souls with my belief, if I could. They are in wiser, better, larger, more loving hands than mine. And if I would not thus fetter my children and friends, I dare not seek to fetter others. My business is to live my own religion to the utmost. If I must worry, I will worry about that, though, as I think my readers are well aware by now, I do not believe in any kind of worry on any subject whatever. Hence, let me again affirm in concluding this chapter, I regard worry about the religion of others as unwarrantable on account of our own ignorances as to their peculiar needs, as well as of God's methods of supplying those needs. It is also a useless expenditure of strength, energy, and affection, for if God leads, your worry cannot possibly affect the one so led. It is also generally an irritant to the one worried over. Even though he may not formulate it into words, he feels that it is an interference with his own inner life, a nagging that he resents, and therefore it does him far more harm than good. And finally, it is an altogether indefensible attempt to saddle upon another soul your own faith or belief, which may be altogether unsuitable or inadequate to the needs of that soul. There is still one other form of worry connected with the subject of religion. Many a good man and woman worries over the apparent well-being and success of those whom she accounts wicked. They are seen to flourish as a green bay tree or as a well-watered garden, and this seems to be unfair, unjust, and unwise on the part of the powers that govern the universe. If good be desirable, people ought to be encouraged to it by material success. So reason these officially good wiseacres, who subconsciously wish to dictate to God how he should run his world. How often we hear the question, why is it the wicked prosper so? Or, he's such a bad man, and yet everything he does prospers. Holy Writ is very clear on this subject. The sacred writer evidently was well posted on the tendency of human nature to worry and concern itself about the affairs of others. Hence his injunction, quote, "Fret not thyself because of evildoers." End quote. In other words, it's none of your business. And I am inclined to believe that a careful study of the Bible would reveal to every busybody who worries over the affairs of others that he himself has enough to do to attend to himself, and that his worry anyhow is a ridiculous, absurd, and senseless piece of supererogation, and rather a proof of human conceit and vanity than of true concern for the spiritual good of others. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14. Ambition and Worry. Some forms of ambition are sure and certain developers and feeders of worry and fretful distress, and should be guarded against with jealous care. We hear a great deal from our physicians of the germs of disease that seize upon us and infect our whole being, but not all the disease germs that ever infected a race are so demoralizing to one's peace and joy as are the germs of such deadly mental diseases as those of envy, malice, covetousness, ambition, and the like. Ambition, like wine, is a mocker. It is a vain deluder of men. It takes an elevated position and beckons to you to rise, that you may be seen and flattered of men. It does not say, "Gain strength and power, wisdom and virtue, so that men will place you upon the pedestal of their veneration, respect, and love." But it bids you seize the spotlight and hold it, and no sooner are you there than it begins to pester you, as with 100,000 hornets, flying around and stinging you with doubts and questions as to whether your fellows see you in this elevated place, whether they really discern your worth, your beauty, your shining qualities. And furthermore, it quickens your hearing and bids you strain to listen to what they say about you. And as you do so, you are pricked, stabbed, wounded by their slighting and jeering remarks, their scornful comments upon your impertinent and impudent arrogance at daring to take such a place, and their open denial of your possession of any of the qualities which would entitle you to so honoured a position in the eyes of men. Then, too, it must be recalled that when fired with the desires of this mocker, ambition, one is inclined, in his selfish absorption, to be ruthless in his dealings with others. It is so easy to trample upon others when a siren is beckoning you to climb higher, and your ears are eagerly listening to her seductive phrases. With her song in your ears, you cannot hear the wails of anguish of others, upon whose rights and life you trample, the manly rebukes of those you wound, or the stern remonstrances of those who bid you heed your course. Ambition blinds and deafens, and, alas, calluses the heart, kills comradeship, drives away friendship in its eager selfishness, and in so doing lets in a flood of worries that ever beset its victims. They may not always be in evidence while there is the momentary triumph of climbing, but they are there waiting, ready to teeter the pedestal, whisper of its unsure and unstable condition, call attention to those who are digging around its foundations, and to the flyers in the air who threaten to hurl down bombs and completely destroy it. Phaeton begged that his father Phoebus Apollo allow him to drive the flaming chariot of day through the heavens, and in spite of all warnings and cautions insisted upon his power and ability. Though instructed and informed as to the great dangers he evoked, he seized the reins with delight, stood up in the chariot, and urged on the snorting steeds to furious speed. Soon, conscious of a lighter load than usual, the steeds dashed on, tossing the chariot as a ship at sea, and rushed headlong from the travelled road of the middle zone. The Great and Little Bear were scorched, and the serpent that coils around the North Pole was warmed to life. Now filled with fear and dread, Phaeton lost self-control and looked repentant to the goal which he could never reach. The unrestrained steeds dashed hither and thither among the stars, and, reaching the earth, set fire to trees, cities, harvests, mountains. The air became hot and lurid. The rivers, springs, and snowbanks were dried up. The earth then cried out in her agony to Jupiter for relief, and he launched a thunderbolt at the now cowed and broken-hearted driver, which not only struck him from the seat he had dishonoured, but also out of existence. The old mythologists were no fools. They saw the worries, the dangers, the sure end of ambition. They wrote their cautions and warnings against it in this graphic story. Why will men and women, for the sake of an uncertain and unsure goal, tempt the fates, and at the same time surely bring upon themselves 1,000 unnecessary worries that sting, nag, taunt, fret, and distress? Far better seek a goal of certainty, a harbour of sureness, in the doing of kindly deeds, noble actions, unselfish devotion to the uplift of others. In this mad rush of ambitious selfishness, such a life aim may seem chimerical, yet it is the only aim that will reach, attain, endure. For all earthly fame, ambitious attainment, honour, glory, is evanescent and temporary. Like the wealth of the miser, it must be left behind. There is no pocket in any shroud yet devised which will convey wealth across the river of death, and no man's honours and fame but that fade in the clear light of the Spirit that shines in the land beyond. Then, ambitious friend, quit your worrying, readjust your aim, trim your lamp for another and better guest, live for the uplift of others, seek to give help and strength to the needy, bring sunshine to the darkened, give of your abundance of spirit and exuberance to those who have little or none, and thus you will lay up treasure within your own soul which will convert hell into heaven and give you joy forever. So long as men and women believe that happiness lies in outdistancing, surpassing their fellows in exterior or material things, they cannot help but be subjects to worry. To determine to gain a larger fortune than that possessed by another man is a sure invitation to worry to enter into possession of one's soul. Who has not seen the vain struggles, the distress, the worry of unsatisfied ambitions that would have amounted to nothing had they been gratified? In women's clubs as well as men's, many a heartache is caused because some other woman gains an office, is elected to a position, is appointed on a committee you had coveted. The remedy for this kind of worry is to change the aim of life. Instead of making position, fame, the attainment of fortune, office, a fine house, an automobile, the object of existence, make the doing of something worthy a noble manhood or womanhood the object of your ambition. Strive to make yourself worthy to be the best president your club has ever had. Endeavour to be the finest equipped mentally for the work that is to be done, whether you are chosen to do it or not. And keep on and still on, finding your joy in the work, in the benefit it is to yourself, in the power it is storing up within you. Then, as sure as the sun shines, the time will come when you will be chosen to do the needed work. Your own will come to you. Nothing can hinder it. It will flow as certainly into your hands as the water of the river flow into the sea. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. Envy and Worry. Envy is a prolific source of worry. Once allow this demon of unrest to fasten itself in one's vitals, and worry claims every waking hour. Envy is that peculiar demon of discontent that cannot see the abilities, attainments, achievements, or possessions of another without malicious determination to belittle, deride, make light of, or absolutely deny their existence, while all the time covetously craving them for itself. Andrew Tooke pictures envy as a vile female. Quote, "A deadly paleness in her cheek was seen, her meagre skeleton scarce cased with skin, her looks awry, an everlasting scowl sits on her brow, her teeth deformed and foul, her breast had gall more than her breast could hold, beneath her tongue coats of poison rolled. No smile e'er smoothed her furrowed brow but those which rose from laughing at another's woes. Her eyes were strangers to the sweets of sleep, devouring spite for ever waking keep. She sees blessed men with vast success crowned, their joys distract her and their glories wound. She kills abroad, herself's consumed at home, and her own crimes are her perpetual martyrdom." End quote. Ever watching with bloodshot eyes the good things of others, she hates them for their possessions, longs to possess them herself, lets her covetousness gnaw hourly at her very vitals, and yet in conversation with others slays with slander, vile innuendo, and falsehood the reputation of those whose virtues she covets. As Robert Pollock wrote of one full of envy, quote, "It was his earnest work and daily toil with lying tongue to make the noble seem mean as himself. Whene'er he heard, as oft he did, of joy and happiness, and great prosperity and rising worth, 'twas like a wave of wormwood o'er his soul, rolling its bitterness." End quote. Aye, and he drank in great draughts of this bitter flood, holding it in his mouth, tasting its foul and biting qualities, until his whole being seemed saturated with it, hating it, dreading it, suffering every moment while doing it, yet enduring it because of his envy at the good of others. Few there are who, at some time or other in their lives, do not have a taste at least of the stinging bite of envy. Girls are envious of each other's good looks, clothes, possessions, houses, friends. Boys of the strength, skill, ability, popularity of others. Women of other women, men of other men, just as when they were boys and girls. One of the strongest words the great Socrates ever wrote was against envy. He said, quote, "Envy is the daughter of pride, the author of murder and revenge, the beginner of secret sedition, the perpetual tormentor of virtue. Envy is the filthy slime of the soul, a venom, a poison, a quicksilver, which consumeth the flesh, and drieth up the marrow of the bones." End quote. And history clearly shows that the wise philosopher stated facts. Caligula slew his brother because he possessed a beauty that led him to be more esteemed and favor than he. Dionysius, the tyrant, was vindictive and cruel to Philoxenius, the musician, because he could sing, and with Plato, the philosopher, because he could dispute better than himself. Even the great Cambyses slew his brother Smerdis, because he was a stronger and better bowman than himself or any of his party. It was envy that led the courtiers of Spain to crave and seek the destruction of Columbus, and envy that set a score of enemies at the heels of Cortes, the conqueror of Peru. It is a fearful and vindictive devil, is this devil of envy, and he who yields to it, who once allows it admittance to the citadel of his heart, will soon learn that every subsequent waking and even sleeping moment is one of worry and distress. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16. Discontent and worry. Closely allied to envy is discontent. These are blood relations, and both are prolific sources of worry. And lest there are those who think, because I have revealed in the preceding chapter the demon of worry, envy, as one that attacks the minds of the great and mighty, it does not enter the hearts of everyday people, let me quote entire an article and a poem recently written by Ella Wheeler Wilcox in the Los Angeles Examiner. The discontent referred to clearly comes from envy. Someone has blonde tresses while she has black. This arouses her envy. She is envious because another's eyes are blue while hers are brown. Another is tall while she is small, and so on and so on. There is nothing, indeed, that she cannot weep and worry over. Quote, "There is a certain girl I know, a pretty little elf, who spends almost her entire thoughts in pity for herself. Her glossy tresses, raven black, cause her to weep a pond. She is so sorry for herself because they are not blonde. Her eyes, when dry, are very bright and very brown, 'tis true, but they are almost always wet because they are not blue. She is of medium height, and when she sees one quite tall, she weeps all day in keenest pain because she is so small. But if she meets some tiny girl whom she considers fair, then that she is so big herself, she sobs in great despair. When out upon a promenade, her tears she cannot hide, to think she is obliged to walk while other folks can ride. But if she drives, why then she weeps, it is so hard to be perched stiffly in a carriage seat while other girls run free. She used to cry herself quite sick to think she had to go month after month to dreary schools, that was her constant woe. But on her graduating day, my, how her tears did run! It seemed so sorrowful to know that her school life was done. One day she wept because she saw a funeral train go by. It was so sad that she must live while other folks could die. And really all her friends will soon join with her in those tears, unless she takes a brighter view of life ere many years." End quote. The conceited girl or woman is tiresome and unpleasant as a companion, but the morbidly discontented woman is far worse. Perhaps you have met her, with her eternal complaint of the injustice of fate toward her. She feels that she is born for better things than have befallen her. Her family does not understand her. Her friends misjudge her. The public slights her. If she is married, she finds herself superior to her husband and to her associates. She is eternally longing for what she has not, and when she gets it, is dissatisfied. The sorrowful side of life alone appeals to her. This, she believes, is due to her artistic nature. The injustice of fortune and the unkindness of society are topics dear to her heart. She finds her only rapture in misery. If she is religiously inclined, she looks towards heaven with more grim satisfaction in the thought that it will strip fame, favour, and fortune from the unworthy, than because it will give her the benefits she feels she deserves. She does not dream that she is losing years of heaven here upon earth by her own mental attitude. We build our heavens thought by thought. If you are dwelling upon the dark phases of your destiny and upon the ungracious acts of fate, you are shaping more of the same experience for yourself here and in realms beyond. You are making happiness impossible for yourself upon any plane. In your own self lies destiny. I have known a woman to keep her entire family despondent for years by her continual assertions that she was out of her sphere, misunderstood, and unappreciated. The minds of sensitive children accepted these statements and grieved over poor mother's sad life until their own youth was embittered. The morbid mother seized upon the sympathies of her children like a leech and sapped their young lives of joy. The husband grew discouraged and indifferent under the continual strain, and what might have been a happy home was a desolate one, and its memory is a nightmare to the children today. Understand yourself and your divine possibilities, and you will cease to think you are misunderstood. It is not possible to misunderstand a beautiful sunny day. All nature rejoices in its loveliness. Give love, cheerfulness, kindness, and goodwill to all humanity, and you need not worry about being misunderstood. Give the best you have to each object, purpose, and individual, and you will eventually receive the best from humanity. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17. Cowardice and Worry. Cowardice is a much more prolific source of worry than most people imagine. There are many varieties of cowardice, all tracing their ancestry back to fear. Fear truly makes cowards of us all. There are the physical cowards, the social cowards, the business cowards, the hang on to your job cowards, the political cowards, the moral cowards, the religious cowards, and 57, nay, 101 other varieties. Each and all of these have their own attendant demons of worry. Every barking dog becomes a lion ready to tear one to pieces, and no bridge is strong enough to allow us to pass over in safety. No cloud has a silver lining, and every rainstorm is sure to work injury to the crops rather than bring the needful moisture for their vivification. What a piteous sight to see a man who dares not express his honest opinions, who must crawl instead of walk upright in the presence of his employer, lest he lose his job. How his cowardice worries him, meets him at every turn, torments him, lest some incautious word be repeated, lest he say or do the wrong thing. And so long as there are cowards to employ, bully employers will exist. Nay, the cowardice seems to call out bullying qualities. Just as a cur will follow you with barkings and threatening growls if you run from him, and yet turn tail and run when you boldly face him, so with most men, with society, with the world. Flee from them, show your fear of them, and they will harry you. But boldly face them, They gentle down immediately, fawn upon you, lie down, or, to use an expressive slang phrase, come and eat out of your hand. How politicians straddle the fence, refrain from expressing their opinions, deal in glittering generalities, because of their cowardly fears. How they turn their sails to catch every breath of popular favour. How cautious, politic, wary they are, and how fears worry and besiege them whenever they accidentally or incidentally say something that can be interpreted as a positive conviction. And yet men really love a brave man in political life, one who has definite convictions and fearlessly states them, who has no worries as to results, but dares to say and do things only of which his conscience approves. No matter how one may regard Roosevelt, cowardice is one thing none will accuse him of. He says his say, does his will, expresses himself with freedom upon any and all subjects, let results be as they may. Such a man is free from the petty worries that beset most politicians. He knows nothing of their existence. They cannot breathe in the free atmosphere that is essential to his life. Like the cowardly cur, they run away at his approach. O cowards all, of every kind and degree, quit ye like men. Be strong and of good courage. Dare and do. Dare and say. Dare and be. Take a manly stand. Fling out your banner boldly to the breeze. Cry out, as did Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death!" Or, as that other patriot did, "Sink or swim, survive or perish, I give my hand and my heart to this vote." Do the things you are afraid of. Dare the men who make cowards of you. Say the things you fear to say, and be the things you know you ought to be. And it will surprise you how the petty devils of worry will slink away from you. You will walk in new life, in new strength, in new joy, in new freedom. For he who lives a life free from worries of this nature has a spontaneity, a freedom, an exuberance, an enthusiasm, a boldness, that not only are winsome in themselves, make friends, open the doors of opportunity, attract the moving elements of life, but that give to their possessor an entirely new outlook, a wider survey, a more comprehensive grasp. Life itself becomes bigger, grander, more majestic, more worthwhile. The whole horizon expands, and from being a creature of petty affairs, dabbling in a small way in the stuff of which events are made, he becomes a potent factor, a man, a creator, a god, though in the germ. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. Worry about manners and speech. Many people are desperately worried about their manners. One has but to read the letters written to the Answers to Correspondents departments of the newspapers to see how much worry this subject of manners causes. This springs undoubtedly from a variety of causes. People brought up in the country removing to the city find the conditions of life very different from those to which they have been accustomed, and they are uncertain as to what city people regard as the right and proper things to do. Where one perforce must act, uncertainty is always irritating or worrying, and because of this uncertainty, many people worry even before the time comes to act. Now, if their worry would take a practical and useful turn, or perhaps I had better state it in another way, namely, that if they would spend the same time in deciding what their course of action should be, there would be an end put to the worry. We have all seen such people. They are worried lest their clothes are not all right for the occasion, lest their tie is of the wrong shade, their shoes of the correct style, and 1,001 things that they seem to conjure up for the especial purpose of worrying over them. Who has not seen the nervousness, the worried expression on their face, the real misery of such people, caused by trifles that are so insignificant as not to be worth 1/10 the bother wasted on them? The learning of a few fundamental principles will help out wonderfully. The chief end of good manners is to oil the wheels of social converse. Hence the first and most important principle to learn is a due and proper consideration for the rights, opinions, and comfort of others. In other words, don't think of yourself so much as of the other fellow. Let your question be not, how can I secure my own pleasure and comfort, but how can I best secure his? It is a self-evident proposition that you cannot make him feel comfortable and happy if you are uncomfortable and unhappy. Hence the first thing to do is to quit worrying and be comfortable. This desired state of mind will come as soon as you have courageously made up your mind as to what standard of manners you intend to follow. The world is made up today largely of two classes, those who have money and those who don't. Of the former class, a certain few set themselves up as the arbiters of good manners. They decide what shall be called good form, and what is not allowable. If you belong to that class, the best thing you can do is to learn to play the game their way. Study their rules of calling cards, and learn whether you leave 1, 2, 3, or 6 when you are calling upon a man or a woman or both, or their oldest unmarried daughter, or the rest of the family. This is a regular game like golf or polo. You have to know the course, the tools to use, and the method of going from one goal to another. Now, I never knew any ordinarily intelligent man or woman who couldn't learn the names of the tools used in golf, the numbers of the holes, and the rules of the game. How you play the game is another matter. And so is it in good society. You can learn the rules as easy as the next one, and then it is up to you as to how you play it. You'll have to study the fashions in clothes, the fashions in handkerchiefs, and how to flirt with them, when to drink tea and where, how to lose money gracefully at bridge, how to gabble incessantly and not know what you are talking about, how to listen intelligently and not have the remotest idea what your vis-a-vis is saying to you. You'll have to join steam clubs and read 10 new novels a day, go to every new play, know all about the latest movies, know all the latest ideas of social uplift, study art, the spiritual essence of colour, the futurists and the cubists. Of course, you'll study the peerage of England and know all about rank and precedence. And indeed, you'll have your hands and mind so full of things that will make such a hash of life that it will take 10 specialists to straighten you out and help you to die 40 years before your time. Hence, if that is the life you intend to live, throw this book into the fire. It will be wasting your time to read it. If you don't belong to the class of the extra rich, but are all the time wishing that you did, that you had their money, could live as they live, and, as far as you can, you imitate, copy, and follow them, then again I recommend that you give this book to the nearest newsboy, and let him sell it and get some good out of it. You are not yet ready for it, or else you have gone so far beyond me in life that you are out of my reach. If, on the other hand, you belong to the class of workers, those who have to earn their living and wish to spend their lives intelligently and usefully, you can well afford to disregard, after you have learned to apply the few basic principles of social converse, the whims, the caprices, the artificial code set up by the so-called arbiters of fashion, manners, and good form, which are not formulated for the promotion of intelligent intercourse between real manhood and womanhood, but for the preservation and strengthening of the barriers of wealth and caste. Connected with this phase of the subject is a consideration of those who are worried lest in word or action they fail in gentility. They are afraid to do anything lest it should not be regarded as genteel. When they shake hands, it must be done not so much with hearty, friendly spontaneity, but with gentility, and you wonder what that faint touch of fingers reached high in air means. They would be mortified beyond measure if they failed to observe any of the little gentilities of life, while the larger consideration of their visitors' disregard of the matter would entirely escape them. To such people, social intercourse is a perpetual worry and bugbear. They are on the watch every moment, and if a visitor fails to say, "Pardon me," at the proper place, or stands with his back to his hostess for a moment, or does any other of the things that natural men and women often do, they are shocked. Then it would be amusing, were it not pathetic, to see how particular they are about their speech, what they say, and how they say it. As Dr. Palmer has tersely said, we are terrorized by custom and inclined to adjust what we would say to what others have said before. And he might have added, it must be said in the same manner. I cannot help asking why men and women should be terrorized by custom, the method followed or prescribed by other men and women. Why be so afraid of others? Why so anxious to kowtow to the standards of others? Who are they? What are they, that they should demand the reverent following of the world? Have you anything to say? Have you a right to say it? Is it wise to say it? Then, in the name of God, of manhood, of common sense, say it directly, positively, assertively, as is your right, remembering the assurance of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Don't worry about whether you are saying it in the genteel fashion of someone else's standard. Make your own standard. Even the standards of the grammar books and dictionaries are not equal to that of a man who has something to say and says it forcefully, truthfully, pointedly, directly. Dr. Palmer has a few words to say on this phase of the subject, which are well worthy serious consideration. Quote, the cure for the first of these troubles is to keep our eyes on our object instead of on our listener or ourselves, and for the second, to learn to rate the expressiveness of language more highly than its compeers. The opposite of this, the disposition to set correctness above expressiveness, produces that peculiarly vulgar diction known as schoolma'am English, in which, for the sake of a dull accord with usage, all the picturesque, imaginative, and forceful employment of words is sacrificed. End quote. There you have it. If you have something to say that really means something, think of that, rather than of the way of saying it, your hearer, or yourself. Thus you will lose your self-consciousness, your dread, your fear, your worry. If your thought is worth anything, you can afford to laugh at some small violation of grammar, or the knocking over of some finical standard or other. Not that I would be thought to advocate either carelessness, laziness, or indifference in speech. Quite the contrary, as all who have heard me speak well know. But I fully believe that thought is of greater importance than form of expression. And as for grammar, I believe with Thomas Jefferson that, quote, whenever by small grammatical negligences the energy of your ideas can be condensed, or a word be made to stand for a sentence, I hold grammatical rigour in contempt. End quote. I was present once when Thomas Carlyle and a technical grammarian were talking over some violation of correct speech, according to the latter's standard, when Carlyle suddenly burst forth, in effect, in his rich Scotch burr. Why, mon, I'd have ye ken that I'm one of the men that make the language for little puppies like ye to paw over with your little fiddlin' twiddlin' grammars. By all means, know all the grammar you can. Read the best of poets and prose authors to see how they have mastered the language, but don't allow your life to become a burden to you and others because of your worry lest you slip a grammatical cog here and there, when you know you have something worth saying. And if you haven't anything worth saying, please, please keep your mouth shut, no matter what the genteel books prescribe, for nothing can justify the talk of an empty-headed fool who will insist upon talking when he and his listeners know he has nothing whatever to say. So if you must worry, let it be about something worthwhile, getting hold of ideas, the strength of your thought, the power of your emotion, the irresistible sweep of your enthusiasm, the forcefulness of your indignation about wrong. These are things it is worthwhile to set your mind upon. And when you have decided what you ought to say, and are absorbed with the power of its thought, the need the world has for it, you will care little about the exact form of your words. Like the flood of a mighty stream, they will pour forth, carrying conviction with them, and to convince your hearer of some powerful truth is an object worthy the highest endeavour of a godlike man or woman, surely a far different object than worrying as to whether the words or method of expression meet some absurd standard of what is conceived to be gentility. Congressman Hobson of Merrimack fame and ex-President Roosevelt are both wonderful illustrations of the point I am endeavouring to impress upon my readers. I heard Hobson when in Philadelphia, at a public dinner given in his honour, he made his first speech after his return from Cuba. It was evident that he had been and was much worried about what he should say, and the result was everybody else was worried as he tried to say it. His address was a pitiable failure, mainly because he had little or nothing to say, and yet tried to make a speech. Later he entered Congress, began to feel intensely upon the subjects of national defence and prohibition of the alcoholic liquor traffic. A year or so ago I heard him speak on the latter of these subjects. Here now was an entirely different man. He was possessed with a great idea. He was no longer trying to find something to say, but in a powerful, earnest, and enthusiastic way, he poured forth facts, figures, argument, and illustration that could not fail to convince an open mind and profoundly impress even the prejudiced. It was the same with Roosevelt. When he first began to speak in public, it was hard work. He wrote his addresses beforehand and then read them. Perhaps he does now, for aught I know to the contrary. But I do know that now that he is full of the subjects of national honour in dealing with such cases as Mexico, Belgium, and Armenia, and our preparedness to sacrifice life itself rather than honour. His words pour forth in a perfect Niagara of strong, robust, manly argument, protest, and remonstrance, which gives one food for deep thought, no matter how much he may differ. There are those who worry about the gentility of others. I remember when Charles Wagner, the author of The Simple Life, was in this country. We were dining at the home of a friend, and one of these supersensitive, finical sticklers for gentility was present. Wagner was speaking in his big, simple, primitive way of a man brought up as a peasant, and more concerned about what he was thinking than whether his table manners conformed to the latest standard. There was some gravy on his plate. He wanted it. He took a piece of bread and used it as a sop, and then impaling the gravy-soaked bread on his fork, he conveyed it to his mouth with gusto and relish. My genteel friend commented upon it afterwards as disgusting, and lost all interest in the man and his work as a consequence. To my mind, the criticism was that of a fool. John Muir, the eminent poet-naturalist of the mountains of California, had a habit at the table of crumbing his bread, that is, toying with it until it crumbled to pieces in his hand. He would at the same time be sending out a steady stream of the most entertaining, interesting, fascinating, and instructive lore about birds and beasts, trees and flowers, glaciers and rocks, that one ever listened to. In his mental occupancy, he knew not whether he was eating his soup with a fork or an ice cream spoon, and cared less. Neither did any one else with brains and an awakened mind that soared above mere conventional manners. And yet I once had an Eastern woman of great wealth, recently acquired, and of great pretensions to social manners, at whose table Muir had eaten, inform me that she regarded him as a rude boor, because, forsooth, he was unmindful of these trivial and unimportant conventions when engaged in conversation. Now, neither Wagner nor Muir would justify any advocacy on my part of neglect of true consideration, courtesy, or good manners. But where is the lack of breeding in sopping up gravy with a piece of bread, or crumbing, or eating soup with a spoon of one shape or another? These are purely arbitrary rules, laid down by people who have more time than sense, money than brains, and who, as I have elsewhere remarked, are far more anxious to preserve the barriers that society and caste have placed between mankind than in seeking an active realization of the biblical idea of the brotherhood of man. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. The Worries of Jealousy. A prolific source of worry is jealousy. Not only the jealousy that exists between men and women, but that exists between women, and between men and men. There are 1,000 forms that this hideous monster of evil assumes, and when they have been catalogued and classified, another 1,000 will be found awaiting around the corner of entirely different categories. But all alike, they have one definite origin, one source, one cause. And that cause, I am convinced, is selfishness. We wish to own, to dominate, to control absolutely, entirely, for our own pleasure and satisfaction, that of which we are jealous. In chapter 1, I tell the incident of the young man on the streetcar whose jealous worry was so manifest when he saw his girl smiling upon another man. I suppose most men and women feel, or have felt, at some time or other, this sex jealousy. That woman belongs to me, her smiles are mine, her pleasant words should fall on my ear alone. I am her lover, she the mistress of my heart, and that should content her. Every writer of the human heart has expatiated upon this great source of worry, jealousy. Shakespeare refers to it again and again. The whole play of Othello rests upon the Moor's jealousy of his fair, sweet, and loyally faithful Desdemona. How the fiendish Iago plays upon Othello's jealous heart until one sees that, quote, trifles, light as air, are to the jealous confirmations strong as proofs of Holy Writ. End quote. Iago bitterly resents a slight he feels Othello has put upon him. With his large, generous, unsuspicious nature, Othello never dreams of such a thing. He trusts Iago as his intimate friend, and thus gives the crafty fiend the opportunity he desires to, quote, put the Moor into a jealousy so strong that judgment cannot cure, make the Moor thank me, love me, reward me, for making him egregiously an ass, and practising upon his peace and quiet, even to madness. Othello gives his wife, Desdemona, a rare handkerchief. Iago urges his own wife, who is Desdemona's maid, to pilfer this and bring it to him. When he gets it, he leaves it in Cassio's room. Cassio was an intimate friend of Othello's, one indeed who had gone with him when he went to woo Desdemona, and who, by Iago's machinations, had been suspended from his office of Othello's chief lieutenant. To provoke Othello's jealousy, Iago now urges Desdemona to plead Cassio's cause with her husband, and at the same time eggs on Othello to watch Cassio. Quote, look to your wife, observe her well with Cassio, wear your eye thus, not jealous nor secure. I would not have your free and noble nature out of self-bounty be abused. Look to't. End quote. Thus he works Othello up to a rage, and yet all the time pretends to be holding him back. Quote, I do see you're moved. I pray you not to strain my speech to grosser issues, nor to larger reach than to suspicion. End quote. Iago leaves the handkerchief in Cassio's room, at the same time saying, quote, the Moor already changes with my poison. Dangerous conceits are in their natures poisons, which at the first are scarce found to distaste, but with a little act upon the blood, burn like the mines of sulphur. And as he sees the tortures the jealous worries of the Moor have already produced in him, he exultingly yet stealthily rejoices, quote, not poppy, nor mandragora, nor all the drowsy syrups of the world shall ever medicine thee to that sweet sleep which thou hadst yesterday." Well might Othello exclaim that he is set on the rack. Each new suspicion is a fresh pull of the lever, a tightening of the strain to breaking point, and soon his jealousy turns to the fierce and murderous anger Iago hoped it would. "Like to the Pontic sea, whose icy current and compulsive course ne'er feels retiring ebb, but keeps due on to the Propontic and the Hellespont. Even so my bloody thoughts, with violent pace, shall ne'er look back, ne'er ebb to humble love, till that a capable and wide revenge swallow them up." Thus he was urged on, worried by his jealousy, until in his bloody rage he slew his faithful wife. Poor Desdemona, we weep her fate, yet at the same time we should deeply lament that Othello was so beguiled and seduced by his jealousy to so horrible a deed. And few men or women there are, unless their souls are purified by the wisdom of God, that are not liable to jealous influences. Our human nature is weak and full of subtle treacheries that, like Iago, seduce us to our own undoing. He who yields for one moment to the worries of jealousy is already on the downward path that leads to misery, woe, and deep undoing. Iago is made to declare the philosophy of this fact when, in the early portion of the play, he says to Roderigo, "'Tis in ourselves we are thus or thus. Our bodies are our gardens, to the which our wills are gardeners. So that if we will plant nettles or sow lettuce, set hyssop, and weed up thyme, supply it with one gender of herbs, or distract it with many, either to have it sterile with idleness or manured with industry, why, the power and corrigible authority of this lies in our wills." Therein surely is great truth. We can plant or weed up in the garden of our minds whatever we will. We can have it sterile with idleness, or fertilize it with industry, and it must ever be remembered that the more fertile the soil, the more evil weeds will grow apace if we water and tend them. Our jealous worries are the poisonous weeds of life's garden, and should be rooted out instantly, and kept out until not a sign of them can again be found. Solomon sang that jealousy is as cruel as the grave, the coals thereof are coals of fire, which hath a most vehement flame. What a graphic picture of worry, a fire of vehement flame, burning, scorching, destroying peace, happiness, content, joy, and reducing them to ashes. In my travel and observation, I have found a vast amount of jealous worry in institutions of one kind and another, such as the Indian service, in reform schools, in humane societies, in hospitals, among the nurses, and so on. It seems to be one of the misfortunes of weak human nature when men and women associate themselves together to do some work which ought to call out all the nobleness, the magnanimity, the godlike qualities of their souls. They become maggoty with jealous worries, worry that they are not accorded the honour that is their due, worry that their work is not properly appreciated, worry lest someone else becomes a favourite of the superintendent, and so on, and so on, and so on, ad libitum. Worries of this nature in every case are a proof of small or undeveloped natures. No truly great man or woman can be jealous. Jealousy implies that you are not sure of your own worth, ability, power. You find someone else is being appreciated. You covet that appreciation for yourself, whether you deserve it or not. In other words, you yield to accursed selfishness, utterly forgetful of the apostolic injunction, in honour preferring one another. And the same jealousies are found among men and women in every walk of life, in trade, in the office, among professors in schools, colleges, universities, in the learned professions, among lawyers, physicians, and even among the ministers of the gospel and judges upon the bench. O shame, shame upon the littleness, the meanness, the paltriness of such jealousies, of the worries that come from them. How any human being is to be pitied whose mortal mind is corroded with the biting acid of jealous worry. When I see those who are full of worry because yielding to this demon of jealousy, I am almost inclined to believe in the old-time Presbyterian doctrine of total depravity. Whenever, wherever you find yourself feeling jealous, take yourself by the throat, figuratively, and strangle the feeling. Then go and frankly congratulate the person of whom you are jealous upon some good you can truthfully say you see in him. Spread his praises abroad. Seek to do him honour. Thus, by active work against your own paltry emotion, you will soon overcome it, and be free from its damning and damnable worries. Akin to the worries of jealousy are the worries of hate. How much worry hate causes the hater, he alone can tell. He spends hours in conjuring up more reasons for his hate than he would care to write down. Every success of the hated is another stimulant to worry, and each step forward is a sting full of pain and bitterness. He who hates walks along the path of worry, and so long as he hates, he must worry. Hence there is but one practical way of escape from the worries of hatred, namely, by ceasing to hate, by overcoming evil with good. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. The Worries of Suspicion. He who has a suspicious mind is ever the prey of worry. Such a one is to be pitied, for he is tossed hither and yon, to and fro, at the whim of every breath of suspicion he breathes. He has no real peace of mind, no content, no unalloyed joy, for even in his hours of pleasure, of recreation, of expected jollity, he is worrying lest someone is trying to get ahead of him. His vis-a-vis is jollying him. His partner at golf is trying to steal a march on him. He is not being properly served at the picnic, and so on. These suspicious-minded people are sure that every man is a scoundrel at heart, more or less, and needs to be watched. No man or woman is to be trusted. Every grocer will sand his sugar, chicory his coffee, sell butterine for butter, and cold storage eggs for fresh, if he gets a chance. To accept the word of a stranger is absurd, as it is also to believe in the disinterestedness of a politician, reformer, office-holder, a corporation, or a rich man. But to believe evil, to expect to be swindled, or prepare to be deceived, is the height of perspicacity and wisdom. How wonderfully Shakespeare in Othello portrays the wretchedness of the suspicious man. One reason why Iago so hated the Moor was that he suspected him. Quote, "The thoughts whereof doth like a poisonous mineral gnaw my innards, and nothing can or shall content my soul till I am evened with him." End quote. How graphic the simile, gnaw my innards. It is the perpetual symbol of worry, the poisonous mineral ever biting away the lining of the stomach, just as mice and rats gnaw at the backs of the most precious books and destroy them. Aye, as they gnaw during the night time and drive sleep away from the weary, so does suspicion gnaw with its sharp worrying teeth to the destruction of peace, happiness, and joy. Then, when Iago has poisoned Othello's mind with suspicions about his wife, how the Moor is worried, gnawed by them. Quote, "By heaven he echoes me, as if there were some monster in his thought, too hideous to be shown." To Iago, "Thou dost mean something. I heard thee say even now, thou likest not that, when Cassio left my wife. What didst not like? And when I told thee he was off my counsel in my whole course of wooing, thou criedst, 'Indeed!' and didst contract and purse thy brow together, as if thou then hadst shut up in thy brain some horrible conceit. If thou dost love me, show me thy thought. End quote. And then we know how, with crafty, devilish cunning, Iago plays upon these suspicions, fans their spark into flames. He pretends to be doing it purely on Othello's account, and accuses himself that, quote, "it is my nature's plague to spy into abuses, and yet my jealousy shapes faults that are not," end quote. And then cries out, quote, "O beware, my lord, of jealousy! It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. That cuckold lives in bliss, who, certain of his fate, loves not his wronger. But oh, what damned minutes tells he o'er, who dotes, yet doubts, suspects, yet strongly loves." End quote. There, indeed, the woe of the suspicious is shown. His minutes are really damned. Peace flies his heart, rest from his couch, sanity from his throne, and, yielding himself, he becomes filled with murderous anger, and imperils his salvation here and hereafter. End of chapter 20.